At 5:06 p.m. on a Thursday in late September, the sky over Kestrel Ridge stopped looking like weather and started looking like metal. Not gray, not cloudy, metal. The smoke had pressed itself so thick across the sun that the whole valley sat under a dull bronze light, the kind that makes fence wire glow and makes every animal on a property go quiet at once. 76-year-old Elias Mercer stood beside the pump house with one hand on a hose bib that had already gone too hot to touch. The thermometer screwed into the shaded side of the post read 49 degrees Celsius. In the shade. Elias had lived through dry years before. He had seen lightning fires, combine fires, grass fires that moved fast enough to outrun a pickup on a bad road. But this one had a different sound. It was not roaring yet. It was breathing. Up on the western shoulder of the ridge, the juniper draw fire was moving at roughly 530 meters an hour. That number came over the county radio twice, calm both times, which somehow made it worse. A fire does not have to sprint when every field in front of it is already cured and waiting. 1.9 kilometers below that ridge sat 14 working places. A pear orchard, 2 hay spreads, a sheep outfit, 4 cattle properties, a seed cleaning shed with 3 generations of equipment inside, and Elias Mercer's place at the mouth of the draw, where his father had planted the first windbreak in 1958, and where every fence line still made sense only if you knew the family history behind it. 14 homes, 14 families, 14 reasons for the county to cut a line across the western slope before dark. And at 5:06 p.m., the most expensive machine on that slope made the safest decision it could make. It turned itself off. The State Dozer was a late-model D9 class crawler, 40-plus tons of steel, satellite-linked, computer-managed, built to move earth with a kind of confidence that makes people step out of its way before it even arrives. It had been trucked in that morning with a certified crew and a simple assignment: finish a 960-meter firebreak along the shoulder of Kestrel Ridge. Bare mineral soil, wide enough to starve the fire. Anchored at both ends so the flame front could not simply curl around it. The plan was correct. The location was correct. The machine was correct. Until the coolant temperature climbed past 118 degrees Celsius. The warning tone came first, then the red screen, then the automatic derate, then the final protective shutdown that the onboard system was designed to enforce. Crew boss Mara Venn put one boot on the trackpad and stared at the display while the fire behavior update crackled in her radio. 480 meters of line still uncut. A required cool-down window of 55 minutes before restart. An estimated 90 minutes of cutting after that. Replacement dozer? 2 hours and 20 minutes away, assuming the road stayed open. Nobody shouted. That was the worst part. The numbers did not need emotion. They explained themselves. Down in the valley, Elias heard the same update on the old radio sitting on the pump house shelf. He listened to Mara call for another unit. He listened to dispatch answer. He listened to the pause afterward, the small empty space that always comes when every professional in the conversation has done the math, and no one likes the answer. Then Elias reached over and turned the radio down. Not off. Down. He was not angry at the new dozer. He had spent his life around machines, and he knew the difference between failure and obedience. That crawler had not failed. It had obeyed its design. It protected the engine because that was the rule written inside it. The problem was that Kestrel Ridge had stopped being a place where rules were enough. Elias walked toward the equipment shed without telling anyone what he meant to do. The shed sat behind the house, half hidden by Lombardy poplars that had lost most of their leaves too early from drought. Its sliding door had a hitch in the bottom rail. Elias lifted as he pulled, the way he had lifted and pulled for 30 years. And a dark interior opened, with a smell no modern shop has ever managed to reproduce. Old diesel, grease, dust. Hot iron cooled 1,000 times and never quite gone cold. At the back, beneath a canvas tarp stained with mouse tracks and oil smoke, sat a 1956 Allis-Chalmers HD-19. It was not pretty. The paint had gone from orange to sunburnt rust. The blade had 2 welded patches. One headlight was newer than the other by at least 40 years. The seat cushion was split across the front, and the left track carried 1 replacement shoe from a machine that had been scrapped before half the valley was born. But Elias had never let it become dead. His father bought it at auction in 1971, after a road contractor outside Yakima went under and sold 3 crawlers in one afternoon. The HD-19 came with a manual, 2 boxes of filters, and a mechanic named Orrin Platt, who stayed for a weekend and taught them the one thing the manual only hinted at. A diesel engine in punishing heat does not need bravery. It needs rhythm. You do not run it like a rented machine. You work it like a living animal. You load it, you listen, you let the radiator catch up before the heat gets ahead. You watch the needle before the needle becomes a warning. You learn the difference between labor and strain. Elias learned that at 21, sitting on a fender with a notebook he pretended not to need. His father learned it faster because his father always learned machines faster. But Elias kept learning it longer. For 55 years, that dozer had cleared ditches, pushed snow, opened old logging roads, buried dead cattle, pulled trucks out of spring mud, and cut fire line around 3 smaller burns that never made the newspaper. It had no diagnostic computer, no protective shutdown, no sensor suite that could decide the safest answer before the operator understood the question. It had a fuel gauge, an oil pressure gauge, a water temperature needle, and an engine note that told the truth to anyone who had earned the right to hear it. Elias pulled the tarp back. He checked the coolant first. Full. Oil next. Dark, but clean enough. Fuel. A little under half. He filled the tank from the drum by the wall, hand pump squeaking in the smoke-heavy air. Then he climbed into the seat slowly, not because he was uncertain, but because 76-year-old knees make you pay for pretending. He sat there for a moment with both hands on the controls. Outside, the fire had not reached the ridge yet. Inside, the old machine waited like it had never left work. Elias turned the key, pulled the decompression lever, and let the starter grind. The engine coughed once, twice. Then it caught with a deep iron knock that filled the shed and shook dust loose from the rafters. He did not smile. He watched the oil pressure rise. He watched the water needle settle. He let it idle for 6 minutes. Then he drove out into the bronze light and turned toward the western slope. By 6:02 p.m., the HD-19 climbed onto the ridge road at a speed that looked too slow to save anything. Mara Venn saw it first. At the time, she had one hand on her radio and the other on the silent state dozer's handrail. The modern crawler sat there in full view of the uncut line, enormous and useless in the exact way only a protected machine can become useless. Not broken, not damaged, simply unavailable. The old Alice came up behind it, blade low, exhaust pipe coughing dark bursts every time the grade steepened. One of the younger crew members said, "Is that thing even legal to run?" Mara did not answer, because the man in the seat did not look like he had come to debate legality. He looked like he had come to finish a sentence somebody else had been forced to stop in the middle of. Elias brought the dozer to the edge of the unfinished break. He looked once at the parked state machine, once at the smoke column, once at the slope. Then he lowered the blade and started cutting west to east. The first 50 meters were ugly, not because Elias was rusty, because the ridge was. Basalt knobs sat just under the soil. Dry bunchgrass clung in mats. The old dozer did not have the smooth hydraulic confidence of the D9 class machine. It hit, corrected, bit, backed half a meter, pushed again. But the blade kept finding dirt. And dirt was what mattered. The trick was not speed. Speed would kill the machine. The trick was not force. Force would spike the heat. The trick was keeping the engine inside a narrow working band for as long as the ridge and the fire would allow. Every 7 or 8 minutes, Elias looked at the water temperature needle. Not glanced, looked. He learned its position the way a doctor learns a pulse. Lower middle was good, center was acceptable. 2 marks above center meant he needed to ease the blade, lighten the cut, and let the fan earn back what the slope had taken. At 6:41 p.m., the needle climbed faster than he liked. He did not stop. Stopping was not rest, not on that grade, not with heat trapped under the hood and no airflow across the radiator. Instead, he feathered the blade up 2 inches, eased the engine load, and let the crawler move dirt instead of fight it. The cut got shallower for 9 minutes. The line still advanced. The needle came back. That was the part nobody on the crew could see at first. From a distance, it looked like an old man driving an old dozer slowly through smoke. Up close, it was hundreds of decisions. How deep? How much throttle? How long to hold pressure? When to back off? When the engine note had gone from work to warning. When the ground was stealing power. When the radiator needed more air and less pride. The ridge darkened by 7:30. The sun did not set so much as vanish. The fire took over the light after that, pulsing behind the smoke in dull orange waves. The first visible flame crested on a spur north of the cut, and the crew went silent in the way people do when distance stops feeling like protection. Mara gave Elias the update over hand signal and radio together. Fire front, 1.2 kilometers. Wind holding west-northwest. Line remaining, 310 meters. Elias lifted one hand to show he had heard. Then he looked down at the temperature needle. That mattered more. At 8:18 p.m., a gust changed the whole ridge. Smoke rolled across the dozer thick enough to erase the work lights for several seconds. Ash hit Elias in the face and stuck to the sweat on his neck. The engine coughed once through the air intake. The needle climbed. For the first time, Mara stepped closer and shouted, "You need to shut it down!" Elias shook his head without looking at her. "No, I need to stop asking it for more than it can give." He backed off the cut, angled the blade, and tracked along the rough edge of the line instead of driving straight into the heaviest brush. For 11 minutes, he did work that looked secondary and mattered completely. Smoothing berms, widening thin spots, connecting broken patches of mineral soil so the fire would not find a seam. The machine cooled just enough. Then he turned back into the main cut. By 9:40 p.m., the old dozer had reached the rock shelf at mid-ridge. This was the part the state machine would have handled in minutes. The HD-19 took nearly 40. Elias had to bite at the shelf diagonally, peel soil from the edge, push lighter loads, and keep the track from climbing where the basalt made the machine lean toward the drop. Below him, Kestrel Valley was dark, except for porch lights that had been left on by people who did not know what else to do. At 10:26 p.m., the radio reported Embercast across the upper draw. That changed the mood. A firebreak can stop a surface front. It cannot stop a burning branch from landing on the wrong side if the wind decides to throw one. Mara sent 2 crew members down the unfinished line with hand tools to clear the most likely catches. Elias watched their headlamps move in the smoke. He took one drink from the canteen tied beside the seat. Then he put it back without finishing it. He had 80 meters left. 80 meters is nothing when you say it in daylight. At night, on a ridge, with fire behind you and a machine older than most of the county's roads under your hands, 80 meters is a country. The needle sat just below the mark he did not want to cross. Elias lowered the blade. The HD-19 pushed into the last brush with a sound that made Mara think of a ship breaking ice. Slow, heavy, still moving. At 11:17 p.m., the water temperature needle touched the high mark. Not past it, touched it. Elias saw it the instant it happened. He had been waiting for it for an hour. He did not pray. He did not curse. He did what Orrin Platt had taught his father, and his father had taught him. He opened the load. Blade up, throttle steady, track forward just enough to keep air moving. No hard push, no dead stop. For 12 minutes, the dozer barely seemed to work at all. The crew on the ridge stared at the half-finished final strip and then at the fire glow behind them, and nobody said what everyone was thinking. Then the needle moved down one width. Not much. Enough. Elias dropped the blade again. At 11:42 p.m., the firebreak met the eastern anchor. 960 meters of raw earth lay across Kestrel Ridge, pale under the work lights, ugly as a scar, and beautiful for the same reason. Elias did not shut the dozer off. He idled it down and let it run, because an overheated machine punished by sudden silence can be harder to save than one kept breathing gently. Mara walked up beside the track. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "That line should not be finished." Elias looked at the dark gauge cluster in front of him. "It is, though." At 12:31 a.m., the juniper draw fire reached the break. It arrived without drama at first. Fire always looks smaller when it is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. Flame moved through grass, licked at low brush, found the raw dirt, and folded into itself where there was nothing left to eat. Then the wind threw embers. 2 landed inside the line near the rock shelf. 1 died in bare soil. 1 found a clump of needles beside a root ball and began to glow. Mara's crew killed it in less than a minute. After that, the front weakened, not all at once. Fires rarely surrender in a way that satisfies a camera. The glow thinned, the sound changed. The ridge stopped breathing so hard. By 1:10 a.m., the immediate run toward the valley was over. At first light, the difference between the two machines was still sitting there in plain view. The state dozer, cooled now and perfectly functional again, stood near the western start of the break, with soot on its blade and a red warning history stored somewhere inside its computer. Beside it, the HD-19's tracks ran the rest of the ridge, crooked in a few places, straight where it counted, unbroken all the way to the eastern anchor. Mara photographed the tracks before the morning wind softened them. Not for publicity, for the report. 3 weeks later, she filed a recommendation with the Regional Fire Equipment Board. The wording was careful because official language has a way of rejecting anything that sounds like admiration. In high ambient heat and time-critical fireline operations, mechanically governed legacy crawlers operated by qualified local owners may provide emergency continuity when computer-managed suppression equipment enters protective shutdown. She asked for a registry, not a replacement program, not a museum, a registry. Names, machines, locations, owner contacts, inspection standards. A way to know, before the next bad hour, what old iron was still alive in the valleys that modern logistics might not reach in time. The board declined the proposal. The reason was not cruel. That somehow made it harder to argue with. Non-standard equipment presented liability, emissions, certification, and operator safety issues incompatible with state deployment policy. Mara read the rejection twice and folded it into her case file. Elias heard about it from a neighbor at the feed store. He did not make a speech. He did not call the board. He did not say the state was foolish, and he did not pretend the old dozer was safer than it was. He just drove home, opened the shed door, and checked the HD-19's fuel level. It was low from the ridge. He filled it. Then he checked the coolant. Then the oil. Then he wiped ash from the temperature gauge with his thumb until the needle was easy to read again. Because Elias understood something the policy did not. The old dozer was not valuable because it ignored danger. It was valuable because the man running it knew how to negotiate with danger in real time. The modern crawler had one answer when the number crossed the line: stop. And most of the time, that answer was correct. It saved engines, it saved budgets, it saved crews from turning a bad day into a fatal one. But on Kestrel Ridge, the question was different. The question was not, how do we protect the machine? The question was, can this machine be kept alive long enough to protect everything below it? That question required judgment. Not romance, not nostalgia. Judgment. The kind built from heat, dust, mistakes, repair bills, long afternoons listening to engines, and 55 years of knowing that a gauge is not a command. It is a conversation. At sunrise, 14 properties still stood below Kestrel Ridge. No award ceremony came for the man who finished the line. No agency added the HD-19 to a formal emergency fleet. No procurement officer wrote down its serial number. The old dozer went back into the shed behind the poplars. Tank full, needle clean, ready in the dark. And the next time someone says a machine is obsolete because a newer one has better protection, remember Kestrel Ridge. Protection can save a machine. But sometimes, when fire is moving through dry grass at midnight, The thing that matters most is not which machine knows when to stop. It is which operator knows how to keep going.